I never imagined that just one phone call, which seemed so full of love, could shatter my heart. One moment, my daughter was asking about my health, speaking sweet words to me, but when she forgot to hang up, I was stunned to hear the cold words she spoke to her husband. "My father trusts me completely, Daniel. He's like a child, never suspecting anything, and it's time to throw that old man into a nursing home." In that instant, the room froze. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart, as a lifetime of sacrifice was suddenly reduced to nothing more than a broken object to be discarded. The next day, I coldly signed away the house for $920,000. Every stroke of the pen cut into my chest like a blade, but it was also the toll of justice. When they returned, dressed in luxury clothes, victorious smiles still on their faces, the key no longer fit the lock. On the door was only an envelope. "You call me a burden? Then crawl on your own feet from now on." A furious scream echoed, and I knew it was their ingratitude that had turned me into the strongest one. And you won't believe what happened after that. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what you're doing right now as you listen to this story. The plate of meatballs, reheated for the third time, was dry and rubbery, yet I still forced myself to swallow. In the past, the dinner table had echoed with the laughter of Margaret and Victoria. Now there was only the clinking of a spoon against the plate, mixed with the ticking of the wall clock. I cooked not to enjoy, but simply to fill my stomach. The refrigerator was nearly empty. The old pot of soup watered down like plain broth, but I still had to eat it. Some nights I even forgot dinner altogether, and by midnight, stomach growling, I just drank a glass of water and went to sleep. My daughter and son-in-law still lived under this roof with me, but every month they claimed to be away on business trips. They said there were big projects, busy schedules everywhere, yet I never once saw any money come in. The house slowly became a temporary shelter, while I sat quietly gnawing at my meager meals in a cold kitchen. My trembling hands dropped the spoon, the metallic clatter echoing harshly across the wooden floor. I bent to pick it up, my knees cracking, needing to brace myself on the table just to stand again. At times, I thought, living like this, I surely wouldn't last much longer, but then I told myself, perhaps that wouldn't be so bad, at least I would no longer be a burden to anyone. The house was so silent that when the phone rang, I jumped, as if someone had suddenly stepped inside. I glanced at the screen and couldn't help but smile. Victoria. Her voice came through, warm. "Dad, are you doing okay?" My chest tightened between love and loneliness. I sat down in Margaret's old chair, the wood faded after so many years she had spent reading in it. "Oh, you know me. I just finished dinner and was about to turn on the news." I didn't say that it was leftovers from 3 days ago, or that I had been staring at Margaret's photo on the mantelpiece for nearly an hour. "Are you eating properly? You know you can order food online, right? I already showed you the app." "I'm eating fine," I cut her off, then admitted, "but yesterday I forgot to turn off the stove under the coffee pot. Luckily I smelled the burning in time." There was a pause. I could picture her frowning, exactly like Margaret used to. "Dad, maybe we should talk about arranging for someone to check in on you regularly." "Daniel thinks I'm fine, Victoria, really. How's the business trip going? You're in Houston, right?" "Yes, the conference ends tomorrow. Daniel is busy meeting clients, while I sit through endless lectures about digital marketing trends." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Dad, I'd better go. Tonight Daniel and I have dinner with a few investors." "All right, I love you." "I love you too. Please take care of yourself." The call ended. The room returned to emptiness. The sound of the wind outside the window was louder than the hollow words of affection that had just passed. A faint click, then a soft rustling sound. I thought my daughter had accidentally dropped the phone into her purse and was about to hang up. But then her voice came through, muffled yet clear enough through the microphone to tear my chest open. "Daniel, you see my dad is slipping, don't you? Yesterday he forgot to turn off the stove. What if he burns down the entire house?" Daniel's voice replied, cold as steel. He's no use anymore, Victoria. We can't waste our whole lives babysitting a senile old man. I heard my daughter laugh lightly, her tone mocking. My dad trusts me completely, Daniel. He's like a child, never suspicious, and it's time we put that old man into a nursing home. My chest tightened. Memories of the night she had a high fever came rushing back, how I stayed awake all night holding her in my arms, praying every single minute. And now, here she was, calculating every dollar over the very roof I had built for her. Victoria's voice was steady, certain, like she was reading from a business plan. This house is worth nearly $1 million now, maybe more. We sell it, put Dad in a decent nursing home, and use the money as a down payment for the house in Evanston. The one with the mountain view we've had our eyes on. Daniel burst out laughing, smug and triumphant. How ridiculous that a senile old man is holding in his hands the very fortune we've dreamed of our entire lives. I sat frozen. In the very house I had laid brick by brick with Margaret 24 years ago, I was hearing my own daughter's laughter become the cruelest sound in the world. They no longer spoke of me as a human being, but as an old piece of furniture to be thrown out to make room for their new comforts. It felt as if a stone was crushing my chest. My breath caught, and I had to cling to the armrest to keep from collapsing. My entire life had been spent carrying the weight to give her a future, and now I was being measured as an expense to be eliminated. Then Daniel's voice came, firm and final, like the last hammer strike on a coffin. We need to do this soon, Victoria. If we wait, he'll burn the whole house down before we can sell it. The phone slipped from my hand and crashed onto the wooden floor. The sharp sound echoed through the room, like nails being driven into the coffin of my very existence. Every detail of this house was built with my own hands. Every nail hammered carried the hope of a better future for my family. I remember clearly the day Margaret and I laid each brick together, her hands aching, yet she still smiled, believing this house would be a lifelong home for our daughter. And now, it has been turned by that very child into nothing more than a commodity to be bargained over. Where laughter once filled the air, now there is only a hollow void. Each wall seems to echo back the voice of my own daughter calling me a burden. In the framed photo on the table, Margaret's eyes bore into me, both pained and reproachful. You gave too much, until even your own child looked down on you and turned you into an obligation. I tried to swallow my tears, but my throat was locked tight. A sob broke free, mingling with the cold tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Each beat felt like a sentence passed down. You have been betrayed. My knees gave way, my whole body collapsing onto the freezing wooden floor, the very spot where I had once knelt to fasten screws for the desk where my daughter used to study. Clutching Margaret's photo frame, the edge of the wood pressed into my skin, my hands trembling violently, my blood draining as though it were being siphoned away. Memories surged back. No longer warm, they had become blades slicing through the fragile trust I had clung to. I remembered Victoria at 9 years old, running into my arms, kissing my cheek, and whispering, "Daddy, I love you most in the whole world." Now, that sentence had turned into a cruel curse, echoing in my mind like mocking laughter. Tears soaked through my shirt as I collapsed over the coffee table, sobbing like a child. A lifetime of labor and sacrifice, and in the end, I was nothing more than a subject of calculation, measured and bartered like some worn-out piece of furniture. This house had once been a home. Now, in their eyes, it was only a tomb of wood and brick, burying me alive while I still breathed. I felt as if I had aged decades in a single moment, my breath short and my heartbeat erratic, as though some invisible hand was crushing my chest. In despair, I whispered into the emptiness, "Margaret, what did I do wrong? Why does our own daughter want to bury me alive?" I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept old bills and papers. My trembling fingers found the folder Margaret once told me never to throw away. You never know when you might need it. For all those years, I had kept everything. A tuition receipt from the university, $52,000 for 4 years. That number is carved deep into my memory. not just for the money, but because it was tied to every drop of sweat and every aching pain in my back each morning. I remember nights when I fell asleep right on the kitchen table, my cheek pressed against bills stained with spilled coffee. Some days I was so exhausted that I collapsed on the doorstep, too weak to take off my shoes, leaving Margaret to pull me into a chair. I remember that winter, I whispered to myself, working during the day, then hauling freight and taking extra shifts at night. The bitter cold split the skin on my hands, turned my fingers purple, yet I still forced them to hold a pen steady enough to sign the check for another semester. While my friends rested on weekends, enjoying parties or vacations, I kept working, scraping together every dollar out of pure love for Victoria. Margaret often wept when she saw blood trickle from my nose because of cement dust, begging me to take fewer shifts. But I only smiled and said, "As long as Victoria has a future, every pain is worth it." She would place her hand on my shoulder, her voice trembling. "Arthur, you're destroying yourself. I just pray that one day she'll understand everything you've sacrificed." Today, those words echo like a warning bell. Back then, Margaret comforted me beside the pile of bills, but now it is Victoria's own voice that calls me a burden. Every dollar I saved had been a hammer strike on my health, a price paid to give her a degree and a future she now takes for granted. I had traded away my strong youth, my hands gnarled and scarred, my back bent far too soon, only to be cast aside by my own child, treated as an obstacle in her path. My throat tightened, my knees buckled onto the cold kitchen floor. The folder slipped from my grasp, papers scattering across the tiles, the scattered remains of a lifetime of sacrifice, now betrayed. In the stack of documents, I found the wedding invoice, $38,200 for a single day. I remember that day clearly. When I said the family could only manage $6,000, at most $9,000, Victoria clutched my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I can't have just a modest wedding. Please. This is the most important day of my life." I nodded. For 5 months straight, I worked weekends installing hardwood floors for a friend in construction, taking off the book's pay. Some nights my back hurt so much I had to crawl on hands and knees into the bedroom, where Margaret would help lift me into bed. But when I heard my daughter whisper at the wedding, "Dad, you're the most wonderful man," I cried behind thick glasses, believing every sacrifice was worth it. Little did I know, that would be the last time I ever heard those words. There were other days too, like when she begged me to co-sign her first car loan, sobbing until her eyes were swollen. "Without a car, I can't work." "Dad, please, just this once." I signed, thinking she would learn independence. But that independence never came. During 1 year of unemployment, Victoria called me daily, her voice trembling. "Dad, I feel useless. I just need one chance, just one." I called everyone I knew, begging favors to find her a marketing job. I also found a bank statement from 3 years ago when Daniel Cross lost his job and they couldn't pay rent, so they moved in with me temporarily. I never charged them a penny. Instead, I paid the higher utility bills and bought groceries for 3 people. Daniel would pat my shoulder, calling me the most generous man in Illinois. Victoria would hug me and whisper, "Dad, we'll pay you back once we're stable." It's been nearly 2 years, and they've been more stable than ever, yet they've never once mentioned moving out or repaying me. On the contrary, I had to cover $950 for an anniversary dinner at a luxury steakhouse just because Daniel insisted. We deserve to celebrate. I also paid $4,500 to repair and fully service their Mercedes, draining the very last of my emergency fund while I still walk in the same worn-down shoes I've had for over 10 years. At a weekend barbecue with friends and neighbors, they laughed loudly, clinking glasses, while I sat there forcing a smile, secretly calculating whether I had enough left to cover utilities that month. Daniel boasted to his friends, "Arthur is like a hero to me. I'm lucky to have him as a father-in-law." But I knew, in his eyes, I was nothing more than an ATM disguised in the robe of a father. Every time I remembered Victoria hugging me, promising to repay me when they were stable, a cold shiver crept down my spine. That hug had been nothing but a cover for the knife already poised to stab me in the back. If Margaret were still alive, she would scream in outrage to see her daughter reduce her own father to nothing more than a bargaining chip. Sitting amidst the pile of documents, I clenched the papers in my hands, then let them scatter across the floor. I collapsed onto the ground, my body trembling, sobbing like a beggar pleading for his past to show him mercy. Each step on the staircase pressed down like a ton of stone, forcing me to cling tightly to the railing just to drag my exhausted body upward, as though the entire house itself was trying to hold me back. And then, when the bedroom door creaked open, the faint, familiar scent of Margaret's old powder drifted through a fragile fragrance, yet sharp enough to tighten my chest and make my knees buckle right at the threshold. Her nightgown still hung there. I collapsed to the floor, burying my face in it, sobbing like a lost child. On the vanity, her reading glasses remained neatly folded, placed as if she might return at any moment to reopen the unfinished page of her book. The room felt less like a bedroom and more like a preserved tomb, and I, a wandering ghost. My breath grew ragged, each gasp sharper than the last, and I thought I might collapse forever here, right where Margaret had taken her final breath. In that haze, I remembered her last moments, her hand growing cold inside mine, the erratic beeping of the heart monitor, and the promises I had nodded to but could never keep. Now, standing in this room, I realized that every drop of my blood, sweat, and tears had been reduced to cold numbers in the mouths of my own daughter. I clutched Margaret's framed photograph, groaning. I was wrong, Margaret. I gave her far too much. Through the glass, her eyes seemed to bore into me not just an image, but a verdict. The dim yellow light of the bedside lamp shone down upon the deed to the house. The capital letters glowed as if illuminated, reminding me that I still held the final power in my hands. A part of me wanted to give in, to lie down on this bed and never wake again, but then Margaret's voice echoed faintly. Arthur, don't let your generosity turn you into a fool. Don't let them take everything from you. Through tears, a strange strength surged within me. I wiped my face, my trembling hand tightening around the deed. This would be my weapon. I looked straight into my wife's photograph and swore, I will not let them bury me alive. I will make Victoria remember that she is facing her father, not a burden. I turned toward the study, opened the drawer, and pulled out a business card I had kept for years. The edges were frayed, the corners slightly curled, but the lettering was still clear. Harold Benson, real estate attorney. The day Margaret was diagnosed with cancer, she had insisted we meet him to make sure everything would be put in proper order. Now, the card trembled in my hand not out of fear, but because I knew I was holding the last thread that could pull me out of this pit of betrayal. The next morning, I walked around my house like a stranger. Instead of seeing a home, I saw what Victoria and Daniel Cross saw: square footage, market value, a massive asset. I ran my hand along the granite countertop I had installed after late-night shifts, remembered how Margaret chose the white and gold pattern, and wondered, would all of these memories be sold off with a single cold signature? Each step through the living room and bedrooms echoed with ghosts of Margaret and Victoria. That Christmas, when Victoria took her first steps in the kitchen, the dollhouse I built over 3 months in the garage, the novel Margaret left open with a bookmark still at page 236. Everything remained, monuments of love and sacrifice. And yet now, my own daughter wanted to turn them into mere dollars on a contract. I put on the black suit Margaret had chosen for her funeral and arrived at Harold Benson's office 20 minutes early. Sitting at the reception desk, my hand trembled only slightly as I signed my name. Inside, though, I knew. I was no longer the senile old man they believed me to be. Harold appeared a man in his mid-40s, streaks of gray in his hair, the calm eyes of someone who had heard hundreds of stories about fractured families. His office walls were lined with law books and family photos, the kind of ordinary life Margaret and I once dreamed of. "Mr. Grant, it's good to see you again," Harold said as he poured coffee, the aroma filling the room. "I remember you and Margaret. My condolences." "Thank you." I accepted the cup, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to discuss something about my daughter and son-in-law." I told him everything. No shouting, no tears, just a low, hoarse voice and a calmness that came from a deep well of bitterness. I saw Harold shake his head, a flicker of pity in his eyes, but I brushed it aside. I did not want pity. I was here to fight. "This house, it's solely in your name, correct?" Harold asked. "Yes. When Margaret passed, full ownership transferred to me." "Then legally, they have no rights. They can't sell, can't force you out, can't touch the property without your consent." Harold scribbled a note, then looked up. "The house is yours. Period." My eyes stung. I remembered the way my daughter once looked at me as her hero. Now that gaze was gone, replaced with cold calculation. I lowered my eyes to the coffee cup, my finger tracing its rim over and over, searching for where the memory had gone wrong. Outwardly, though, I straightened my back, my eyes unflinching. Harold studied me for a long time. "The Chicago market is very strong right now. If you wanted to sell, in less than a week you could have buyers offering above price. But I need to ask, are you truly certain?" I gripped the cup, recalling Victoria's laugh as she called me a burden, Daniel's voice calculating my life like a line item. Every painful memory became fuel, igniting the steel in my reply. "Mr. Benson, I know exactly what I'm doing." Harold nodded, quietly watching me. In that silence, I met his eyes without a flicker of doubt. At that very moment, I knew I had taken back a piece of control over my life. The meeting ended with my calm but unyielding words. "Prepare everything. It's time they learn this old father is not a piece of furniture to be thrown away." When I stepped into the parking lot, I looked up at the clear blue sky. But instead of hope, all I saw was the emptiness of a hole my daughter had carved deep into my chest. My old familiar car waited for me, and as I placed my hands on the steering wheel, they trembled the same hands that had once driven Victoria to school every single day of her childhood. I sat in the car for a long time. In that silence, I almost felt Margaret sitting beside me again, quietly placing her hand on my shoulder, reminding me that I wasn't truly alone. My phone buzzed. Victoria's name lit up the screen. For the first time since I overheard her betrayal, I smiled. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times I let it ring. Let her and Daniel keep believing that the grateful old man was still waiting obediently for their instructions. Just before the final ring, I answered. Victoria's voice poured out, lively and sweet, dripping with false warmth. "Dad, we were just about to tell you everything. We only want you to be comfortable, like a king in your new home." Daniel's voice slid in, smooth as a salesman's pitch. "That's right. You deserve to rest. You don't need to worry about the property anymore. We'll make sure someone takes care of you." I clenched the phone, listening to their carefully rehearsed script. Victoria chimed in, almost giddy. "Dad, you only need to bring a few clothes. We'll handle the rest. Our sweet old man just has to sit back and let us love him." Daniel added, colder now. "Think about it. Doctors right at your side, 3 meals a day. Isn't that the dream of old age?" Then, Victoria lowered her tone, feigning a quiver of emotion. "Your little girl will never abandon you. We just want you safe, while you enjoy the rest of your life." Each word cut like a blade, but I no longer trembled. In my mind, the links of my plan clicked together like gears in a blueprint. My voice stayed calm. "Actually, Victoria, I also have a surprise for you, when you come back." She laughed, confident, convinced that I had surrendered and signed the papers. But in my heart, I thought of the garden where Margaret once planted her flowers, where the swing still creaked in the wind, and I swore this surprise would be nothing like what she imagined. When the call ended, my hands were steadier than they had been in years. I drove home, went straight to my desk, and opened the laptop. The screen flared bright, flooding me with countless choices. I typed, "Real estate agents, Chicago." The results filled the page. I scrolled carefully, reviewing track records, client reviews, just as meticulously as I had once calculated the load-bearing strength of steel beams. Every click of the mouse, my hand was steady as iron. This was no longer the obedient old man they thought they knew, but the man Margaret had once loved. Resolute, rational, unshakable. One name stood out: Stephen Cole, age 41, average time to sell a home, 16 days, record sale, closed in 24 hours. His confident smile in the photo, paired with a glowing testimonial. "Stephen sold our house in just 5 days. Cash buyer, quick close, no hassle." My eyes locked on the phone number printed below. Beside it, Margaret's photograph on my desk seemed to watch me, her gaze asking, "Arthur, are you sure?" I was sure, more certain than of anything since the day I lost her. With firm fingers, I dialed Stephen Cole's number. "Stephen Cole, Cole Real Estate. How can I help you?" "Mr. Cole, this is Arthur Grant. I want to sell my house, and fast. How quickly could this possibly be done?" "That depends on many factors, but with the right house and a reasonable price, I've closed in as little as 1 week or 2 with cash buyers. What kind of timeline are you thinking about?" 1 week? My heart pounded. That fast? Absolutely. The Chicago market is very hot right now, especially for well-maintained homes in long-established neighborhoods. Could you tell me a bit about your house? I looked around the kitchen, seeing it for the first time through the eyes of a buyer. 2 stories, about 3,600 square feet, built in the year 2000, located in Lincoln Park. 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. I've maintained it carefully. Most of the renovations I did myself. Stephen's voice brightened with interest. Exactly the kind of property investors are hunting for. Original owner, excellent upkeep, prime location. Would you like me to come evaluate it? How soon can you come? I could stop by this afternoon, 2 o'clock. Perfect. And after hanging up, I sat in the stillness of the kitchen. In 3 hours, a stranger would walk in and place a number on the memories Margaret and I had built. I cleaned the house the way she used to, dusting the windowsills, straightening the cushions, polishing the counter. But this time, it wasn't to welcome guests, it was to prepare for a judgment. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I adjusted my jacket, inhaled the faint scent from the lavender sachet Margaret had left in the linen closet, and placed my hand on the brass doorknob I had installed 16 years ago. On the other side of the door waited either salvation or ruin. I turned the knob. Stephen Cole appeared exactly as in his photo, professional, confident, in his early 40s. He carried a leather briefcase, a tablet, and his eyes lit up as he stepped inside. "Wow! So," he paused, looking up at the crown molding I had carved, then down at the 3/4-inch oak floors Margaret and I had chosen. "Mr. Grant, I have to be honest. I walk through hundreds of homes, but very few keep their integrity and detail like this one." He missed nothing, testing faucets, running his hand over the granite edges, tapping the walls for solidity. Each time he raised his camera to take a picture, I felt as though he was capturing fragments of my life. When he praised the flooring, I remembered my blistered hands, the blood when the hammer slipped. Every compliment was a bittersweet cut. I looked at the counter where Margaret once baked apple pies, now soon to be reduced to numbers on an appraisal sheet. Stephen swiped across his tablet, showing me comparable homes, between $880,000 and $920,000. My chest tightened. He smiled. "With the condition and special details here, I'd recommend setting it at $920,000, fast and at top value." $920,000. The figure spun in my head like a verdict. That was the cash price for my love, sweat, blood, and tears. I wanted to scream that this was my home, not merchandise, but I only nodded, silent like a man selling his own soul. When Stephen said 9 days, I thought bitterly, 9 days shorter than the time Victoria had planned to put me in a nursing home. But this time, I will strike first. I collapsed into Margaret's old reading chair. The grief swelled, but with it came a flicker of strength. This wasn't pure joy, but the victory of a survivor winning only because I had been pushed into a corner. Stephen phoned an investor, his voice buoyant. Lincoln Park, original owner, pristine maintenance, plenty of custom features. Hanging up, he turned with a radiant smile. They want to proceed immediately. I can have the first contract ready by tomorrow morning. Sunlight poured through the window, painting the room in a golden memory. I imagined Margaret smiling in that glow, nodding her approval. I laid my hand on the doorframe and whispered farewell. This was not just the sale of a house, it was the burial of 24 years of memories. The pendulum clock, Margaret's 10th anniversary gift, ticked steadily, stamping the seal of fate. I lifted my head, my voice firm. 8:30 in the morning. Perfect. The next morning, Stephen Cole returned. He brought with him a thick stack of contracts, neatly clipped inside a folder, along with a notary public and even hot coffee. His professionalism radiated from every detail: the sale price sheet, the payment schedule, the temporary occupancy rights, and even a comparison chart of recent transactions in Lincoln Park. The figure of $920,000 was placed on the table, not only fair, but an outstanding deal. The notary, a middle-aged woman with a voice as steady as a clock, patiently explained each clause. I read thoroughly, even the tiny print at the bottom that most people skip. Everything was clean, transparent. Stephen also outlined the entire transfer process, the escrow account, the banking timeline, with the guarantee that within 48 hours I would see the money. There was no trap hidden anywhere. When the notary pointed to the signature line, I picked up the pen. As the nib touched the paper, I remembered every drop of sweat I had shed building this house. And then, I smiled because now it had become the weapon to turn the tables. Each signature I placed felt like a shovelful of dirt thrown onto the coffin, burying Victoria and Daniel Cross's greedy dream. With every stroke, the bitterness in my chest gave way to a cold, quiet satisfaction. I imagined my daughter's face when she learned that the house no longer belonged to them, and a dark, almost frightening thrill surged within me. For the first time in many years, I was no longer being led by the nose. I was the one holding the wheel. When the notary's seal stamped down, the sharp clack rang out like a judge's gavel in a courtroom, and I was the victor. I lifted my head and looked straight into the stream of sunlight pouring through the window. Margaret, my love, at last I have kept my promise. I will never let them exploit me again. I knew with absolute clarity, this was not the end. It was the opening shot of the greatest play of my life. The first 3 days after signing the contract were a blur of paperwork and inspections. The real estate staff combed through every page of records spanning more than 20 years. The investor's appraisal team arrived in person, moving with measured steps, their voices steady. They found nothing to criticize. On the contrary, they praised my craftsmanship. One man leaned toward a colleague, thinking I couldn't hear. This man clearly knows exactly what he's doing. The flooring, the wiring, everything is top quality. I turned away, but the words only pierced deeper. Their praise no longer made me proud, it only reminded me that this house, my life's work, would soon no longer be mine. From the 4th to the 6th day, I became a man with a secret mission. I searched for apartments online, typing as though I were redrawing my life from the beginning. I wanted something small, convenient, quiet, a place where I could start over with $920,000 in the bank. I found an apartment in Oak Brook, a community for older residents, complete with a golf course and a recreation center. Exactly the kind of place Margaret and I once dreamed of when we spoke about our twilight years. I also called storage facilities and made a list of what had to be kept: Margaret's jewelry box, the commemorative china set, the wedding album, the unfinished novel she had left on her nightstand. Fragments of an entire life. From the 6th to the 9th day, a strange new confidence surged within me. Each morning I woke, I felt closer to freedom, closer to the moment Victoria and Daniel Cross would finally learn that the doddering old fool was far sharper than they had imagined. Mrs. Whitmore, the neighbor, began to notice. Seeing strangers carrying papers in and out, she asked, "What's going on, Mr. Grant? People keep coming and going." I offered a faint smile. Just a few renovations. I hated lying, but her curious eyes left me no choice. She had become an unknowing witness to the elaborate deception I was forced to perform. On the 8th day, Stephen Cole called. "Everything is set for tomorrow's closing, Mr. Grant. The buyer is very pleased. The funds will be wired the same day." That evening, I packed a suitcase with clothes and essentials, not to move immediately, but to be prepared for anything. I looked at Margaret's photograph and whispered, "I hope you understand what I'm doing." Saturday morning, the Chicago sky was clear, the kind of day Margaret once called the best kind. I put on the gray suit she had bought me for Victoria's college graduation, not the black funeral suit, but one tied to a milestone of hope. The real estate office buzzed with activity. Stephen Cole orchestrated the process like a conductor, while the notary, a calm, middle-aged woman, read the clauses in a voice steady as a clock. I held the pen. Each stroke was no longer light, it carved like a blade into my skin, painful yet liberating. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, as though I were signing a death sentence for my old life. Each signature snapped another invisible chain. When the notary stamped the papers, the sharp thud echoed like a judge's gavel, and I was the one who had won. Stephen smiled. "You made the right choice, Mr. Grant. Sometimes a new beginning is exactly what's needed." I answered flatly, my tone cold as steel. "This isn't a choice, it's survival." The notary handed me the confirmation. $920,000 had been transferred, minus the fees. I stared at the figure. It wasn't just money. It was a ticket to freedom and proof of 24 years wasted trusting the wrong people. I drove through familiar streets. Victoria's old elementary school, the park where Margaret and I once walked. The streetlights smeared across the windshield like trails of tears carried by the wind. But this time, I didn't cry. I felt released. Back at the house, I sat in my car, staring at the building that was no longer mine. The keys in my hand felt like a relic. Tomorrow, I would hand them to the new owner. But Victoria and Daniel, when they returned after 3 days, would find only an empty shell and a bitter lesson. I called a locksmith. "Windy City Locksmith, this is Frank Doyle. I need every lock replaced today. I'll pay in cash." 2 hours later, Frank arrived. As he removed the old brass lock I had once installed for Margaret, each clink and clatter sounded like the toll of regret. I muttered under my breath, "From now on, only you and I will know this secret." The new alloy locks were cold, mechanical. Frank handed me the fresh set of keys, and I pushed them deep into my pocket, as though hiding a weapon. Inside the empty house, my footsteps echoed hollow, a mournful sound. I packed only what mattered: Margaret's jewelry box, the wedding album, her unfinished book. I held the novel, whispering, "You never got to read the ending, but I know how this ending feels, cold as blood." Everything else, the furniture, Victoria's childhood keepsakes, the curtains Margaret sewed, I was forced to abandon. The house had become a hollow shell. I locked it with the new keys and stepped outside, knowing this was likely the last time. That night, the streetlights streaked across my windshield like tears carried by the night wind. I drove to Belmont Residences. Mrs. Alvarez, the manager, handed me the key. I spoke firmly. "I'll take it now. No need to think it over." The apartment was small. White walls, sterile fluorescent lights, cheap furnishings, the chemical smell of freshly scrubbed floors. I set down my suitcase, surveying the soulless room. Yet this was the start of something new. I placed Margaret's photo on the nightstand. In the dark, I whispered to the mirror, "From today, Arthur Grant is no longer a victim. He is the one who decides." I opened my laptop and searched for a trustworthy bank. I chose Illinois Community Bank, small, discreet, with personal service. I called and booked an appointment for Monday morning. Signing that contract would raise a wall of steel, blocking Victoria and Daniel from ever touching my money. That weekend, I practiced life as a stranger, making coffee alone, shopping at the grocery store, rehanging Margaret's photo in my new apartment. On Sunday, I sat at Lakeside Brews, watching people walk their dogs and push strollers, living ordinary lives. Margaret had loved mornings like that. I whispered, "I haven't lost everything, not as long as I keep my memories of you." Monday, I dressed in a suit and went to the bank. Philip Turner, a young banker, helped me open a special account. When the numbers appeared 920,000, I knew I had placed it beyond Victoria's grasp, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt fully in control of my destiny. They thought I was a docile lamb, but this time, the lamb has become a wolf. On Tuesday night, I sat in a single chair in my new apartment. Not Margaret's reading chair, not the armchair in the living room where I had once overheard Victoria's betrayal, but just an ordinary chair in an empty room that belonged entirely to me. Outside, the wind hissed through the cracks in the window, the faint laughter of neighbors drifting from afar like another world. Inside, only silence remained heavy, suffocating. I opened my laptop and typed the words, "mini surveillance camera." The screen lit up, overflowing with options. The obvious ones, the kind disguised as pens, as clocks, even as phone chargers. My finger hovered on the keyboard, breathing deeply. What I was about to purchase was not just a device, it would be the final witness to this theater of betrayal. In just a few days, Victoria and Daniel Cross would return, expecting to find a compliant, grateful father ready to follow their plans. Instead, they would meet the burden they had scorned, transformed into the greatest nightmare of their lives. After 20 minutes, I found exactly what I needed, a mini wireless camera hidden inside a phone charger. Its specifications were perfect for my engineer's mind: Wi-Fi connection, phone app control, motion detection, a 12-hour battery, crystal clear image quality, and most importantly, it could stream live to my phone anywhere with internet. $139, plus $30 for next-day rush shipping. 2 weeks ago, I might have hesitated. But now, that sum was nothing more than a grain of sand in the desert. With the camera chosen, I moved on to the next crucial step, the letter. The first draft dripped with rage, heavy with the pain of betrayal. The second was cold, too void of personal hurt. By the third, I had found the right voice, solemn but ruthless, loving yet absolute. I picked up my old fountain pen, the nib scratching across the paper with a steady rasp. My hand trembled, but the strokes remained firm. The scent of fresh ink spread through the empty room. The letter. If you are trembling as you read this letter, it means all your calculations have turned to ash. I overheard your entire conversation. You called me a burden, plotted to discard me in a nursing home, and counted the money you would gain from selling this house. The house has already been sold for $920,000 in cash. The money is safe in my new bank account, and from now on, no one but me will ever touch it. I have moved to a place where I am valued, not endured. Do not worry about me. Worry about where you will live. Your belongings have been sent to Chicago Moving and Storage on Cicero Avenue. You have 30 days to retrieve them before fees are charged. I gave you a roof to shield you from the storm, yet you sought to cast me into it. For over 30 years I taught through sacrifice. Today, I teach through loss. From this day forward, this house is no longer yours to set foot in. It has been sold, and our memories here end with it. I hope this lesson proves worth the price you chose. Love, Father. On Wednesday morning, FedEx arrived with a small package. I opened it in the kitchen, the sound of the box cutter slicing through cardboard echoing like a tear in the silence. I tested the camera, a tiny tick from the motion sensor, the phone screen flashing the sharp image of my kitchen. I walked back and forth, watching my own reflection on the screen, an old, cold face staring back like a stranger. That afternoon, I drove to the old house one final time. I opened the garage with a remote I had never given to Victoria and Daniel, pulling the car inside to avoid the neighbors' eyes. The fading light streamed through dusty curtains, casting the house in a yellow, withered glow. I breathed in deeply the familiar scent of Margaret's lavender sachets, the lemon oil I once used to polish the wood, and the faint trace of 24 years of family dinners within these walls. But there were also intrusions, their suitcases stacked by the stairs, mail strewn across the kitchen table. They had treated this place not as a home, but as a hotel, a storage unit. I planted the disguised camera into an outlet near the front door. My phone displayed the perfect angle, the entire entryway, and the very spot where I would place the letter. I paced a few times, testing the motion sensor. Everything worked flawlessly. Then, I taped the envelope on the inside of the door, directly at eye level, impossible to miss. Standing in the living room for the last time, I touched the fireplace mantel where Margaret had kept our family photo for 24 years. For a fleeting moment, I thought I heard her setting the dinner table, young Victoria's laughter echoing faintly, but the house swallowed it all, leaving only stifling silence. I lifted my gaze to the ceiling stains from old rainwater, scars of years past. All of it would soon belong to someone else. My love, I whispered to Margaret's memory. I did not abandon this house. It abandoned us. Once greed turned it into a commodity. I drew one final breath, my chest tightening, then locked the door with the new keys. The sharp click rang out like a judge's gavel, sealing an entire life shut. Outside, the street lamp cast my shadow long across the door, a figure both tragic and unyielding. Back in my apartment, I sat down, eyes fixed on my phone screen. The camera was ready, battery full, motion sensor armed. The timestamp glowed, 7:30 Wednesday evening. Outside, the wind whistled through the window frame, while I stared at the empty doorway through the app. Tomorrow, Victoria and Daniel would return from their business trip, driving back from Houston, imagining how they would spend my money while plotting my exile to a nursing home. But they had no idea. The grateful old father they expected had become something else entirely. A predator waiting in the dark. I gripped the phone tightly, a cold smile on my lips. Tomorrow I won't need to speak. This house will speak for me. On Friday morning, I woke with a strange sense of anticipation, the anticipation of a man about to witness justice strike back after years of being trampled. That morning's cup of coffee tasted richer than any other day. Even this small apartment, usually cold and confining like a prison cell, suddenly felt open and spacious as I sat down, phone in hand, watching the live feed from the camera. On the screen was the front door of the old house, the stage where the final act was about to unfold. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I knew their routine by heart. Victoria always insisted on leaving Houston around noon to avoid traffic, while Daniel Cross drove exactly at the speed limit with obsessive caution. That meant within little more than an hour, their familiar black SUV would turn into my driveway. I placed my eyes on the photograph of Margaret on the bedside table and whispered, "My love, I hope you understand. I had no choice. They abandoned me. But today, justice will return." At 4:45 my phone vibrated. Notification, motion detected. My heartbeat thundered like the pounding of a drum at an execution. On the screen appeared their glossy black SUV pulling slowly up the driveway. The evening sky glowed blood red, heavy with twilight, casting shadows over the street, turning the scene into a cold theater of retribution. The car doors opened. Victoria stepped out first, stretching after the long drive. Daniel Cross hauled the suitcases from the trunk. Their faces carried the casual confidence of people convinced they were about to step back into easy inheritance. I tightened my grip on the phone and smiled coldly. "Do you see this, Margaret? Justice is walking straight to its door." Sound. Victoria rummaged in her handbag, pulling out the key ring. The faint jingle of metal echoed through the phone's speaker, the chime sounding like a funeral bell for their lost control. She slid a key into the lock, the very lock I had replaced only a day earlier. The harsh screech of metal scraped out, echoing in the empty hallway captured by the camera. Her brows knitted, her eyes first flashing suspicion, then shattering into raw fear. "What the hell is this? Why won't it open? This is my house." Daniel stepped forward, yanking the handle so hard that his knuckles cracked. He tried again, but the door remained immovable. Beads of sweat formed across his forehead, though the air was cool. His voice faltered as he muttered, "No, no, this can't be. Someone changed the locks. This isn't a mistake. This is a trap." Victoria clutched the keys tighter, then dropped them to the steps with a sharp clang. The metallic rattle rang again, sealing the truth they had lost everything. She scrambled to pick them up, hands trembling, before pulling out her phone to dial the old landline. I watched her face contort on the screen as the ringing echoed unanswered. "No one's picking up, not even voicemail." Daniel ground his teeth. "Try his cell phone." Victoria's voice cracked, choked with panic. Dad, where are you? I can't reach you. You won't answer." Her voice quivered like a lost child's franz. Meanwhile, Daniel ran around to the back door. Each of his footsteps thudded hollow across a house that no longer belonged to them. 5 minutes later, he returned, pale as chalk. "The back door's locked too. The garage remote is dead. Victoria, we've been thrown out of our own house." His eyes darted wildly, unfocused, like a man on the edge of madness. Then he pointed at the kitchen window. "That one isn't latched. I'll boost you up." I watched as my daughter clambered awkwardly upward. Her business suit snagged on the frame, tearing with a loud rip, a humiliation made visible. She disappeared inside, and moments later the feed showed her stepping into the dim kitchen. The air must have hit her at once. The stale smell of aged wood and dust filled the space, making her falter. In the silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock carried through, louder than ever, a sound she had never noticed when she lived here. Now, it tolled like a grim reminder. Within minutes, the front door clicked open from inside. Victoria stepped out again, her face ashen, eyes wide with panic, like someone who had just stumbled out of a nightmare. I sat in my apartment, sipping a mouthful of cold coffee, my lips curling into a slow smile. The warmth of victory spread through me, even as, across town, Victoria and Daniel writhed inside the very snare they once believed they had set for me. Daniel Cross had just dragged the suitcases into the living room when both of them froze. Right there on the front door, at eye level, was a pristine white envelope. On it, in the familiar, meticulous handwriting, were the words, "Victoria and Daniel." The room seemed to freeze over. The ticking of the wall clock grew unbearably loud, hammering like a judge's gavel against their temples. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached up, nails scraping the wood as she peeled the envelope away. When she tore open the seal, the ripping sound echoed harshly through the hollow room, intensifying the suffocating weight already pressing down on them. I sat in my small apartment, leaning forward, both hands clutching the phone as the camera feed displayed the scene. Victoria unfolded the letter, and Daniel read over her shoulder. I watched their expressions shift, step by step, confusion, to shock, to disbelief, to, and finally, utter panic. Victoria screamed, "He sold the house. He betrayed us, betrayed his own family." Daniel snatched the letter from her hand, scanning it frantically as if hoping the words would somehow change. Then he roared, eyes blazing, "That cunning old man, he tricked us from the very beginning, $920,000, all gone." Victoria burst into tears. Her carefully painted makeup streaked down her cheeks, black lines of mascara melting under the sickly yellow neon light, leaving her face like a collapsing mask. "That money was supposed to be our future." Daniel cut her off, his voice dripping with venom. "Your future? Wake up, Victoria. Your family was nothing more than a walking wallet, and now that wallet is empty." Victoria shrieked, spinning on him, clawing at the edge of the table with trembling fingers. "Don't you dare put this all on me. If it weren't for you leeching and failing, I wouldn't have to beg my father for every last cent." Daniel snarled, yanking at his own hair, pacing like a caged animal. "Failing? And what about you? A woman in her 30s still clinging to her father to survive, do you call that success?" Victoria sobbed, her bloodshot eyes blazing. "At least I wasn't fired for greed and deceit. You dragged me into this pit." Daniel slammed the letter down onto the table with a heavy thud that reverberated like a verdict, shouting, "No, you dragged me in. If it weren't for your obsession with inheritance, I would never have gotten tangled up with this rotten family." Victoria collapsed to her knees on the carpet, her hands clawing at the fibers as broken sobs tore from her throat. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Daniel bent down, glaring at her with bitter contempt. "Your future is already in ruins. Your life was nothing worth destroying anyway. From the start, you were just a parasite living off that old man's money." Victoria wailed, her face wet with tears. "Shut up! You never loved me, did you? You only loved the money." Daniel let out a hollow, chilling laugh, the sound bouncing off the walls of the shrinking room like the echo inside a prison. "Finally, you see it. This marriage was nothing but a business deal. And now, that deal has gone bankrupt." The air thickened into something unbreathable. For a moment, the two of them only stared at each other like sworn enemies, the silence between their screams sharper than any blade. Then everything exploded, Victoria sobbing uncontrollably, slamming her palms against the chair, Daniel raging, knocking a glass off the table, the shattering crash splitting the air into shards. Through the phone screen, I sat motionless, a cruel smile tugging at my lips. In my chest, a whisper rose. This is the tragic comedy they wrote and performed themselves. And I am the only audience. I watched them collapse in the very living room that had once been my home with Margaret, now nothing more than a battlefield of their downfall. Victoria buried her face in her hands, while Daniel sat frozen, staring at the letter with the hollow look of a man who finally realized he had been dealt the cruelest blow. And I, from afar, knew they were tasting the same bitter medicine they once intended to force down my throat. The phone screen went dark with a sharp flick, leaving the room in cold silence, only the pounding of my heart echoing in my chest. That was enough. I didn't need to watch any further. The play was over, and justice had finally spoken. I walked slowly into the small kitchen. On the wooden shelf, Margaret's bottle of Bordeaux still lay there, the wine we had saved for a special occasion that never came. My fingers brushed across the thin layer of dust on its label. 1 second of hesitation, then the pop of the cork echoed through the air like the sound of liberation itself. The rich scent of the wine spread across the room, carrying memories of evenings when Margaret and I sat on the porch, dreaming of a peaceful old age. I poured myself a glass, the red liquid shimmering under the dim yellow light, lifting it toward Margaret's photograph resting on the table. My voice was low but resolute. "Margaret, my love, today justice has spoken for us both." The first sip burned as it slid down my throat, then spread like fire through my body. It scorched away the years when I was belittled, called a burden, and replaced them with a brilliant flare in my chest. Triumph. The phone buzzed. On the screen, an unknown number appeared with a few trembling, hurried words, perhaps a plea for help. I glanced once, pressed my lips together, then swiped it away with finality. The dry hiss of the gesture sounded like a blade cutting through a rope that had long since rotted. I powered the phone off completely. From this moment, Victoria would never reach me again. I stepped toward the window. The Chicago sky was sinking into a crimson dusk, the light burning like fire, consuming the remnants of the past. On the horizon, the last rays stretched like flames, torches carrying off a life that had already died. Somewhere out there, my daughter and her ungrateful husband were writhing in the truth. The man they once called a burden was the very one who had brought them to their knees. Somewhere, in the house once filled with memories, the house from which I had been cast out like refuse, they now sat in despair, left with nothing but a letter as their final verdict. I took another sip of wine, murmuring softly to Margaret's photograph. "Do you see, my love? At last I've kept my promise. I never let them turn my generosity into shackles. The invisible chain around my neck has shattered, and for the first time in so many years, I can breathe freely without the weight of ghosts pressing down on me." A faint smile touched my lips. I had reclaimed my name, my dignity, and the life they once tried to strip away. I was no longer the senile old man grateful for scraps. I was Arthur Grant once more, a man with his own fortune, his own will, and his own path. Turning away, I set the glass down and looked outside again. The road stretched straight ahead, glowing gold beneath the sunset, rolling out like a carpet toward the future. For the first time in years, I knew with certainty it was my road. Arthur Grant had walked away from that house, not as a man cast out, but as a king abandoning a rotten throne, and he would never return. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about it in the comments. Thank you for watching.